What's up, Dolphin fans? I'm Jim Grieshaber. Call me Gries. And hey, the Dolphins have had 2 3-game losing streaks this season. As we hit the bye week with the squad show, we look at the possibility of their first 3-game win streak and what they have to do to make that happen.
Hey, I'm Zgonina. It's bye week. The neighbor cut the power line. No power at the house, but I'm ready to talk Dolphin football today.
Kyle Krabs, host of Locked on Dolphins. I do have power, and the Dolphins also have the Week 11 AFC Defensive Player of the Week, Jordan Brooks. Congratulations to him, fresh off his performance in Madrid.
Fins up. It's the Dolphins squad. Everything Miami Dolphins, every week. Breaking down all the big hits and game-changing plays from South Beach. The way only the Locked On Podcast Network can. Sunshine, speed, and squad goals. The Dolphin Squad Show starts now.
Yes, it does. Brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can bet just $5. Make you holler. And if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app, which you might want to use on Dolphins versus Saints. I'm just saying that 3-game win streak looking like it is within reach. I'm Gries. That's Z. Powerless. What kind of neighbors does he have? We're going to find out in a minute. And that, of course, is Kyle Krabs, who keeps you updated all the time with everything related to the Miami Dolphins. We have the breakdown today. Look at the rundown on the side. The bye week breakdown, kind of like the state of the Fins. Momentum, definitely a real thing with Miami. A win is a win, and they've won 3 out of 4, not just 2 in a row. Are the seats still hot for Mike McDaniel, for Tua Tagovailoa? Yes, of course, you know I'm going to mention that. Of course, Champ has come out and spoken. Champ Kelly, the interim GM, has said something to the players that Kyle and Z love, that the players have to love, and we like what we're seeing and hearing from him, although it's very temporary and probably won't last all that long. But we have all that coming your way on the Squad Show, on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, and, of course, the #1, numero uno podcast network in the world of sports. All right, Z, I have to ask you first, what kind of neighbor do you have cutting the power line? Is he still alive? What's going on?
I don't know. I got home and the power was off. I went online and, ComEd said that underground damage. So someone must be digging somewhere on the street.
Or like the animals that you've been hunting are burrowing underground and they're trying to escape the Z-Man.
I wish. No hunting yet for me, so still waiting.
Well, you look as handsome as ever, man. And Kyle Krabs, I know you've been busy. You had the GM show this morning, and people are asking who it's going to be. We'll get to that here on the show. But, guys, they made it to the bye week at 4-7, which didn't look like it could even be a possibility 4 weeks ago. You win 3 out of 4 to get to 4-7, and now we're looking at the possibility of a 3-game win streak. When we preview the Saints game, we'll look at that a little bit more. But as we're coming off this game in Madrid and a long flight, and it's been a long season and a tough road for the Dolphins, but they come back with the victory. It wasn't easy. They got stopped twice on the goal line. Tua didn't play very well, but the formula, Kyle Krabs, I'll start with you. The formula is there. And regardless of how Tua plays, regardless of how Jalen Waddle plays as the #1 receiver, regardless of whether Waller's there or not, the jumbo package and those 3 running backs are the strength. And I said 3 are the strength of this team. It all starts with Achan, but the depth in the backfield and the way that they've run the ball in recent weeks after being way down at the bottom in the league all season long, it gives you a lot of hope moving forward, not just into the Saints game and the rest of this year, but the future for this team.
Yeah, it's they had the injury interruptions to the right side of the offensive line in the first week, but really since week 4, it's been the same 5 guys that they've rolled out for half the season. And I think you're seeing some of the chemistry with those 5 guys and being out on the field. And I think they are at this interesting intersection where Austin Jackson's had his activation window started from injured reserve to come back and go back in at right tackle. And Larry Bourne's played guard in the NFL before during his time in Chicago. Would they dabble in that after he's done relatively well playing at right tackle in Austin Jackson's absence? But I think they have a chance to get even more push where you look at some of those short yardage situations against Washington, and right guard kind of felt like the spot where they didn't get the movement that they needed from Cole Strange trying to move Javon Kinlaw, and it kind of bottles up the Achan run, and then the Ollie Gordon run. The right side of the line gets washed down in. So I'm really interested to see what they're willing to tinker with because, to your point, Gries, like yeah, the running game's humming. Mike McDaniel, I'm sure in some degree with the injury to Tyreek Hill by necessity, but he's really leaned into some of his roots. And I think it's made it a more enjoyable offense to watch on tape because of how the run schemes are all tying together. They've diversified the run scheme. It's not just outside zone stuff. You're seeing a lot more gap concepts and pin and pull, and they're pulling offensive linemen and running behind it and running duo and getting downhill. There's a lot going on in that aspect of this offense right now that selfishly, as somebody who, whether they win or lose, they score 3 points or they score 30 points, like I'm going to watch coach's film and see what it looks like. I'd much rather watch these really fun layers of run game all compounding week over week to create more and more layers, because it gives you hope for, okay, if they stay the course, let's lean into this, right? Like, let's make this part of the identity and find ways to build off of this control the line of scrimmage mentality, because that was the complaints for the 22 and 23 Dolphins and 24 Dolphins was they weren't physical enough, consistently enough at the line of scrimmage.
Yeah, no doubt about that. And when I look at this team, Z, I know football is so much about a mentality and a mindset, right? So when you bring in that jumbo package and you run that football and you pound the other team, look at what they did against Buffalo, right? Controlling them on both sides of the line of scrimmage. And the Bills Josh Allen had a big bounce back game against Tampa Bay and Baker Mayfield after that Dolphins loss. But the Bills were manhandled by the Dolphins, and so were the Falcons, by the way. And the Falcons were on fire coming into that game. And I guess the Dolphins had a little bit of an advantage with the Niners having played them before that and kind of gave them a little bit of a blueprint. But can you talk a little bit, Z, about what that's like with the run game when you're an opposing defender and you look at this team and you think that, the identity of the Dolphins was Tua and Tyreek and Waddle and all these weapons and the Ferraris, and all of a sudden they've become a smash-mouth team when you are on the opposing line of scrimmage. What does that do to you mentally when the other team consistently just pounds the football at you and has success doing it?
Oh, it takes your soul away if they shove it down your throat in the run game. I mean, going into a game, you're always like, as a running team, we got to stop that run. We got to, put that ball in the quarterback's hand and make him beat us, And to sit there and go against this Miami team, like Kyle was saying, with the pin and pulls, and they're pulling linemen, they're doing this, they're doing that. Again, you're going against a team that loves to throw the ball earlier in the year. So you're seeing a light stance. You're like, ooh, here we go. It's pass rush time. And you roll off the ball, and all of a sudden that tackle or that center comes and just ear holes you. It takes a lot of steam out of you, especially, the pass rush. So I get it, but it also helps slow down that pass rush, because now you got guys guessing a little bit, It could be second and short. You're thinking, oh, it's a run. My guard's light. I'm going to get my little sprinter stance. I'm going to roll, and then here comes the tackle because, the guard's blocking out, So, again, that helps, slow down the opposing defenses, in their pass rush and make them think more. So when you have to think, you play slower. The one thing back in the day when we would study teams as players, especially like I'll pull out Zach Thomas, Zach and Junior, both those cats, when I played both of them, they would study so much. Like Zach would call out plays. Zach would tell me where to go. He goes, hey, play heavier in the A gap. Or we were playing a 2-eye. He put me down, on a tilt nose because he knows, the guard's pulling. He wants me to make sure I can hold that center off for him. You know what I'm saying? So he was a step ahead all the time because he wasn't the fastest cat in the world, but you watch him play, he's the sideline to sideline. You think he was a 4'5" guy when he was a 5'2" guy. I mean, I was faster than him, but he was so smart because all of his studying, he was got to jump on it. But when you got to play slower, now you're back to your 5'5" guy instead of a 4'8" guy. You know what I'm saying? So it helps out a lot when you get that running game rolling.
That's the analysis you get from Jeff Zgonina, the former Dolphins defender, and played for so many teams and coached as well. And I'm going to get Z's thought on this in a minute too, Kyle. But Achan has been magnificent in his last few games. He's a big part of the reason why Devon Achan is why the Dolphins have been so good lately, why they've won 3 out of 4 and 2 in a row, looking at a 3-game win streak. Achan, third in the league in rushing, all of a sudden has 900 yards behind only Taylor, who's having an otherworldly season for Indianapolis, as you pointed out the other day, Kyle, and Cook of the Bills, and Achan's right on his heels. But not only does Achan have 900 yards on the ground and a 5.5 average, he has 370 yards receiving. So, Kyle, I want to start with you on this and then get to Z. Wasn't it just a couple of years ago we were talking about the running back being completely devalued and overrated in this game, and none of them could get paid, and everyone's getting away from the running game, and It was literally flying in the face of everything.
Mhm.
I'm 53 years old. Everything I've ever known from football has been the running game, from the Lombardi Packers to the Parcells Giants to everyone in between. A couple of years ago, these guys couldn't get paid, and now all of a sudden they're at the forefront again. Kyle, what do you attribute that to, and how has it turned back so quickly?
Yeah, well, first and foremost, Z, welcome back onto the grid.
Yeah, finally.
We got that face lit up with this power in the house. Everything's cyclical, right? You know, everything in the NFL is there's really no new concepts, right? Like the fun new wrinkles in a week in 2025 are really just like 1950s stuff out of a modern formation half the time, where you're seeing this prevalence of two high shells and Vic Fangio defense, where we're going to present two high safeties in the same pre-snap presentation, and we're going to force you to do all your processing after the snap for quarterbacks, right? And offensives are getting up to the line of scrimmage, and they're seeing two high safety shells, and they're saying, well, we get a 6.5 man box. I guess we're going to run the football because they're giving us light box counts. And that's like the merry-go-round now going around, where you've seen these backs taking advantage of, you know, the Rams is a great example with how they evolved from being an outside zone, very outside zone prevalent team in their first Super Bowl appearance with Sean McVay. And then they go up against the Patriots, and the Patriots flood every gap at the line of scrimmage. And they say, you're going to be -1. You can't block the backside defender, and you're not going to get leverage on the front side of the runs. So Sean McVay comes out and says, well, now I got to go out and I want to be a little bit more of a vertical run scheme. I want to get 330-pound maulers on the offensive interior so I can run downhill, I can run duo, I can run power, and I can get vertical displacement instead of horizontal displacement. And that evolution is just like a microcosm of you're trying to solve the problems that defenses are giving you. And if you're good at what you do building a team, you're ahead of the curve. And I think that's what you've seen with some of these backs, and Buffalo with what their offensive line has been like, and their weapons are now a concern for them this season, but they paid James Cook. And I think if you're going to get paid as a running back and get paid in that $13 to $18 million, I don't know anybody's going to be knocking on Saquon Barkley's door for that kind of money anytime in the near future, but you better be able to make contributions on all three downs. And that's where your point about the passing game contributions that Devon Achan is capable of making. I think sometimes the menu's a little too broad for him. But I get trying to put your best player in position to manufacture touches and get him more targets and touches, because you don't want to just hand the ball off to him and mash him in between the tackles 25 times a game. But these guys that have this passing down value and can line up and run routes and be weapons on the perimeter or from the slot, yeah, you're more of an offensive weapon as compared to just like an authentic bell cow running back that you're going to be worried about what his shelf life looks like 2 years from now, which is a big barrier for why a lot of these guys were not getting paid high.
That's great analysis there. And Z, you played with Ricky Williams the last time the Dolphins had a running back like this, in my opinion. And Ricky wasn't, I don't think, as good out of the backfield as Achan is, but he was a battering ram into the line of scrimmage. And I think about Don Shula, how he won with Zonka, Kick, and Mercury Morris, and then he was able to adapt with Dan Marino. And as much heat as Mike McDaniel's gotten this year, and look, he might not be back next year. I've heard everyone in their brother who could end up being the coach here, including Lane Kiffin, by the way. But Lane Kiffin's going to be the coach everywhere, in case you haven't been following his saga.
They're going to clone him.
Jets and houses being built in Gainesville and LSU and everywhere else, you know, Lane Kiffin. But Z, you've played with Marshall Faulk, who Achan's a little bit more similar to every type of running back in the world. And when you look at what he's done and you look at Shula winning with the running game, and then he adapts and wins with Marino in the passing game, I think Mike should get credit for adapting and going back to something so basic with the jumbo package in the run game to not only overcome the limitations of his quarterback there. It only took me 14 minutes to say that, but also to play to his strengths, which is clearly not the way that this offense was built for him.
No, I think Mike did a great job, and you know, he midstream adjust. You know, when he saw that the passing game was not there anymore, and went and relied more on the running game. Again, like Kyle said earlier, you know, that's his bread and butter. That's what he was brought up on, was that running game, and he tweaked it a little bit. You know, you see more pooling. You know, I know that it was more of that zone stuff that he grew up on. You know, with the Shanahans. You know, and they they had few powers, but it was mostly that outside zone scheme.
Yeah.
And he, if you look at some of these runs, a lot of it's between the tackles, which is nice to see. Now, I think he relied on it too much on those 4th down calls on the goal line and should have stretched it out a little bit more. But, he decided not to, and we got stopped on that one with Kinlaw. I would hope that it bounced outside more, but oh well. But, that's what he did. You always got to, as a play caller, offense or defense, you got to adapt. If it's, during the season, during the week, during your bye week, or even during the game, you got to keep changing it up. If you're getting stopped, you can't just keep having that mentality, I'm going to stick this down your throat. Because I've been burned on that. We had a guru head coach coordinator in St. Louis, and Mike Martz, who I love to death, but we went against the Patriots, and they were stopping our pass game, and, his ego got in the way, which we get, and a lot of things played into that game. We still should have won it, but he should have gave the ball to 2-8 a little bit more in the first half, and maybe things would have turned out a little bit differently, but who knows?
I mean, only the best two-way running back in the history of football, I think, Marshall Faulk, right? 2-8 you're talking about there. We're up against the break, Kyle and Z, but on the other side, I want to break down a little bit more of Mike McDaniel's performance, especially these past few weeks, because a lot of people still not feeling like he's safe or should be safe. A lot of fans were still calling for him to get fired after not kicking the field goals in the last game, especially the one down the stretch. And, I think some people have pointed out correctly, as we did on the show after the game, about things like players not knowing situations and Achan going out of bounds instead of sliding and staying in. I mean, you got to know these things. And to a lot of people, that boils down to coaching. So we'll break down what Mike's done and how he's been better, or has he been better? The locker room and the way the players have showed up, there's definitely been something there, and they have not quit on this season, and now they're in the position to make a serious run toward what could be maybe even a playoff push. And they seem to be doing this almost every year, or at least, recently. So the losing streaks early on and then turning it on late in the season, that isn't something that you can have and get in the habit of. So we'll break all that down on the other side. We'll talk about the Saints a little bit later on, but first a little bit from Peloton right here on Dolphin Squad Show, Locked On Podcast Network, the #1 sports podcast network, and your team every day.
I'm Cody Rourke from Locked On Broncos, and this episode is brought to you by Peloton. Peloton is shaping the future of fitness with the brand new Peloton Cross-Training Tread Plus, powered by Peloton IQ. This is Peloton's most advanced equipment yet, giving you real-time guidance and endless ways to move, whether you're running, lifting, or you're cross-training with your favorite instructors like Alex Toussaint. It's training reimagined to make your workout more personal. Peloton is built for breakthroughs with features that help you plan, stay motivated, and hit peak performance. You can let yourself run, lift, flex, and go, while Peloton handles all the rest. Plus, Peloton IQ provides real-time strength coaching, tracking your progress and suggesting weights that challenge you so you can get stronger. Plus, the new movement tracking camera, it counts your reps and corrects your form in real time, making sure every rep is safer and smarter. So let yourself run, lift, flex, push, and go. Explore the new Peloton Cross-Training Tread Plus at onepeloton.com.
All right, come on now. There you go. Sticky in there. Z's got his power. We're all good. That's Kyle. I'm Gries. It's your Dolphin Squad Show on the Locked On Podcast Network, the #1 sports podcast network, and your team every day. They were playing the victory song in Madrid, and the Dolphins got it done again in a squeaker, 16-13 over the Washington Commanders. They had lost a ton of games in a row, Washington had, but their head coach, Dan Quinn, took over the play calling on defense as McDaniel on offense for the Dolphins. Those two guys know each other really well. So in retrospect, looking back, Z, being the coach you are, do you feel like the Dolphins, and obviously the goal line situations were huge in the game, not punching in for the touchdowns there, and they did get the one stop on the goal line on defense, but do you feel like the offense moving up and down the field and not punching it in and maybe not having the type of game that they had the week before against Buffalo and losing a little bit of that momentum, do you attribute some of that to Mike going against a guy who knows him so well in Quinn? They coached together for so many years. Quinn taking over those play calling duties, giving a little shot in the arm to the Commanders defense, or do you just attribute it to the Dolphins not being consistent, maybe a combination of all that?
Well, it's kind of a combination of all that. But again, we mentioned after the game, when Quinn took it over, it's a different defense. Okay, it's different style of calling, and Mike had to figure that out, in the first half because what Joe was doing the week before, Dan was not doing, on Sunday. So he was bringing pressure more. He was, going after the guys more. He was doing some things that were new. So that gives the guys on defense a little. Oh, we've got something new. They're turning us loose a little bit more, and it gives the guys a little more juice. So it takes the coordinator on the other side to be able to calm down the guys, and because it's different looks, they're panicking, they're young. They're seeing stuff they didn't see during the week during the prep. They just got to make the corrections on the sidelines and go from there. And, the punching in, and you hope you always score, touchdowns because it's easier then, it's easier to play when you're up a couple scores, but it just didn't happen, So, he should have took field goals. Yes, but he's an analytics coach. So he's going to play the analytics, you do or die by it. I'm a guy that take the points because I'm old school.
Kyle, the analytics definitely said they had a better chance to win the game if they went for it there, because if you missed, they got to go 99 yards. And that's something that we pointed out after the game as well. But Mike did take a lot of heat for not kicking the field goals, the 2 field goals that he didn't kick, and then the 2 field goals that Gay missed for the Commanders. And by the way, he got cut right after the game. And Quinn said, hey, he's a great dude, but you got to make those, right? And he pushed them both right, and it cost them the game. They were both 50 yards plus, but 50 is the new 40 in the NFL for kickers anyway, Kyle. But what do you attribute all this to on the offensive side of the football? I feel like the Commanders said we're going to take away that intermediate passing game from Tua. He cannot throw the ball deep no matter where he is or what field he's on. So we're going to take away that intermediate passing game. We're going to force them to beat us just continuously running the football. And they got the win. But I think maybe I'm wondering, do you have a little bit of concern there with the way that they were able to take away that intermediate passing game? And that really is the only passing game that Tua excels with.
Yeah, Tua's statistically regressed in the 10 to 19 area quite a bit this year versus what his standard was in the first couple of years under Mike. So, yeah, I think that being one of the marquee areas where Tua has had so much success. You think about when Snoop Huntley plays the game against Tennessee, and they talk about, well, Snoop's never thrown no-hitch in-breakers before, so that was a big adjustment for him, and that being theoretically what Tua is really good at. Teams know what time it is when they play Miami as far as where they want to get the ball in the passing game, and I think that's what makes your running game success so important, because that's going to allow you to manipulate the second level of the defense and create those windows when you get into your play action passing game. And I think that's also what makes the diversification of the run game so important, because teams kind of know if they're just going to run their outside zone stuff, right? If they're going to get on their tracks and they're going to push to the outside hip of the tight end or the ghost tight end on the front side, if we overplay a little bit to the front, and if we tell the linebackers be a little bit more patient and leverage it, we could probably leverage the throwing window a little bit more. But what happens when you start running downhill? Like you go sit here and be patient and catch duo with somebody coming downhill at you, you're going to be put in really bad position as a linebacker. So I think the diversification there allows them to attack the second level of the defense and kind of open and pry back up some of those throwing areas. Now, I think that's where, Dan Quinn, they put some trust in their front. They played a certain kind of presentation on the back end to cap and take away any chance of explosive plays. And Miami played it close to the vest. And I think for me, what it felt like to me was most like, hey, we can't really get a pulse with the coaching change on what they're going to do. So let's not overextend ourselves beyond what's working. So you're getting scheme throws, you're getting the ball quick out to the perimeter, whatnot. I do think the larger talking point about that regression in the 10 to 19 area and some of the misses there that have yielded turnovers all season long is a big talking point for Tua to try to figure out, like, where have we gone so awry here? It feels like sometimes the footwork's not as crisp and then the timing's not quite off. There's been other times where he's missed the throw. There's been times the Chargers game, Waddle, it's kind of an off-schedule throw into a second window and he bobbles it and then it gets intercepted. So there's plenty of blame to go around as far as that area of the field. But yes, I do think teams know where Miami wants to get with the football, and that's why it's been so important for them to find other ways to challenge you in new ways to get you out of that default setting of how you're going to play the Dolphins on offense.
Yeah, and Z, if you're scheming against this team, right? And I know that Atlanta had some guys out, and their defensive line was tiny in that game. And Washington had some injuries in their front seven that were huge in that game, some real big holes for Miami. But with teams stacking the box, I think another point to make with that intermediate passing game, Jonnu Smith had a big year last year. Waller started to play big this year, but Tua hasn't had a tight end for most of the season early on. And then now with Waller being on injured reserve, but probably not out for the season, but we don't know when he's coming back, I don't think. But I think the absence of a weapon at the tight end position has really hurt Tua there too. And then also when you look at it, it's unique from a scheming standpoint, Z, because teams still have to double Waddle. I think if you don't have a shutdown corner, you have to double him, right? So that takes a second guy, and that opens up a little bit for the run game. But as teams start to scheme this Dolphins team right now, if you're the Saints or any other team coming up on the schedule, what are you trying to take away? How are you playing this team? What are you giving them? Because you got to give them something. And how are you approaching that moving forward from the defensive side against this Miami offense?
Well, if I'm the Saints, you're going to have to worry about stopping the run because I believe they're having some difficulty stopping the run down there. So they're going to have to do that, and then take Waddle away when it's it's going to be a pass down, because after that, I think there's no real threat, because you don't have a tight end, in the middle of the field, so you don't have to worry about that too much, So you got to rely on just stopping that run. You have Achan out of the backfield. You have to worry about that, But after that, between him and Waddle, that's really about all the really scary weapons we have on offense right now. So if you can get control of that, they have a chance.
And you're hoping for broken tackles too, Kyle. That's another thing with this offense, and Malik's pretty good at that, and Waddle and Achan out of the backfield. You hit that intermediate pass or the short pass, you break a tackle or two. But as teams start to stack the box more, and teams that are healthy and have a good defensive line, they're not going to be able to run the ball. There's going to come a game when they're going to have to win it by throwing the football. And I'm just right now wondering how they're going to do that, Kyle.
I think you have to embrace a certain kind of game script, right? Where, you stay patient with run game, right? It's not every game you're going to average the 6.5 or whatever that they did. But if you could slog it out and consistently get into 3rd and 5s, 3rd and 4s, that's a lot better way to make a living than getting 3rd and 13s, right? And if you take a minus run on 1st down, that is what it is. Now you're behind the sticks, and you're probably going to throw twice because you're trying to give yourself a chance to convert and get a fresh set of downs. But if you go possessions over possessions where we're trying to throw the ball because a team had early success, that's like the Carolina game script, right? Where Miami got up on that game 17-0, but they didn't run the ball. I think they had 27 yards, 17 yards rushing as a team. And despite playing the vast majority of the game with a lead, they covered up your play side offensive tackle with Derek Brown and relied on him to be a superhero, and you couldn't run the ball in that situation. But they kept running outside zone. And I think that's where the last month, the most important thing to me has been, in the entirety of the Mike McDaniel era, the 2 games in which they've called the highest frequency of gap scheme runs as compared to zone runs have been against Atlanta and this past week against Washington. So the fact that if you want to run zone, the book's out on how to, challenge outside zone. But if you're going to give a front presentation that says we're going to challenge outside zone, or we're going to put that extra hat on the front side outside, okay, now win the angles with a different kind of run scheme. And I think that's where the continuity that the group that is there and playing for the offensive line, the time that they've had together, and the fact that you can go heavy and create extra gaps, it gives you a chance to at least continue to be patient throughout the course of a 60-minute game, even if you're not going to be hitting 12, 15, 22, 11, 16, 9-yard runs for these big chunk gains on a possession-by-possession basis.
And Z, the offense has been good, but the defense has been great the last couple of weeks. Let me just throw a stat at you, Z, that you're going to love, right? The Miami Dolphins have 12 takeaways this season. Five of them have come in the last 2 weeks. No coincidence. It's their first 2-game win streak.
No, not at all. I've been saying it all year. We got a run game in the offense. We get takeaways. We got a chance to win games. And that's what we've been doing the last few weeks. That's your formula to win games. When you're not in a very explosive offense right now and your defense is struggling. Run the ball, keep the defense off the field, shrink the game, and let's go play some football. Because that was the old formula back in the day with Peyton Manning. When we used to play him. I remember we were in Houston. We had Ron Dane. We must have ran the ball 60 times just to keep Peyton off the field. When we won that game. It was an ugly game to watch, boring game to watch if you're a fan, but we just wanted to make sure that, Peyton was not going to beat us.
Kyle, real quick before we hit the break, your thoughts on the defensive intensity the last couple of weeks. You mentioned Jordan Brooks, the player of the week, 20 tackles, 10 solo. He had an 18-tackle game. I believe it was against Atlanta. I'm not exactly sure. I think it was. But, man, he's been unbelievable this season. He's the player of the week. You pick the ball off in overtime, and then you run it right down there and kick the field goal and win the game. And then against the Bills, you pick off Allen in the end zone. He fumbles, Cook fumbles. It's just been a real nice run for the defense that's been just crushed all year long.
Yeah, it's been great to see that group continue to solidify, and it was all the young guys to me that I thought you saw it on the TV copy, and then you watch the coaches film, and 7th round rookie Zeke Biggers has a couple of really nice plays. You continue to see Kenneth Grant get more and more comfortable with winning, and you're seeing him come into his own with his athletic skill set. So, those guys up front kind of gelling and allowing Jordan Brooks to be really a heat-seeking missile on the back end. I think he's leading the league in tackles, and tackles isn't always like the greatest measure of like linebacker performance because a tackle at the line of scrimmage versus 8 yards downfield is not created equally. But, man, he is all over the place. He's been playing outstanding, and it's been fun to see that group, which was just as maligned as the offensive side of the ball. I think they're doing more with less, if we're being honest, just based on what the secondary groups look like and all the youth and the young guys that have to play. Well, there's a lot of continuity and a lot of money sunk into the offensive side of the ball. This defensive group, it's a lot of young guys, a lot of rooks, a lot of veterans with a chip on their shoulder, and seeing them really come together the way that they did and how they're interacting after big plays on the field and on the sideline has been really cool.
Yeah, the secondary has been playing a lot better in spite of some injuries. And then, of course, you've had Dodson playing well, and Chubb's been playing great since all the trade rumors, and he ends up staying here, and they trade, Jalen Phillips instead. And then, of course, when you look at this defense, it's hard not to mention Minkah Fitzpatrick, who played great against Washington as well. It's the Squad Show on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Locked On Dolphins host Kyle Krabs, former Dolphin Jeff Zgonina. I'm Jim Grieshaber. Call me Gries. We are here live on YouTube on the #1 sports podcast network in the world. And then after the show, we upload, you download Spotify, Apple, iHeart, Stitcher, Podbean, and of course on Roku as well. When we come back, we take a look at the Saints game coming up, the schedule down the road, and what Miami can do to keep the momentum going. But more importantly, the schedule's pretty favorable, at least 3 of the next 4. And even Pittsburgh, Aaron Rodgers is out now. So this is opening up nicely for the Miami Dolphins, kind of like those holes for Achan these past few games. It's Z, it's Kyle, it's Gries right here on the Squad Show. We're going to keep it going on the other side. But first, a word from FanDuel. All right, here we go. And the NBA is back, and Bam Adebayo is almost back for the Heat now as well. And what a place to get in on the action. FanDuel, right? The official sports betting partner of the NBA. Even if you missed the start of the game or want to ride the hot hand, FanDuel has live bets on everything from who will score next to fourth quarter comebacks. Plus, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay for a shot at a bigger payout. More action on the action. Stack the action with FanDuel. It keeps every game exciting, especially when your team's the one making that late push. Loving this Heat offense this year, scoring a lot of points. And right now, FanDuel is giving new customers $300 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. So head to FanDuel.com to sign up and play your game with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. All right, here we are on the Squad Show, keeping it moving. And, man, the Heat are fun to watch this year. I'll just throw that out there, coming out of that spot. And Bam's coming back. Normally, they're the team strangling you and choking you to death with the defense. But the offense has really gotten a big push. And without Tyler Hero, all right, this isn't a Heat show, but still got me a little fired up there, Z and Kyle, because the Dolphins have been so opportunistic lately. They have their identity on offense, which is running the football. They've really stepped into it. They've accepted it. They've embraced that identity. The defense is bend, don't break. They're going to give up a bunch of yards. They're going to give up yards through the air. They're going to give up yards on the ground. They're going to give up a lot of first downs to the opponent, but they've been so opportunistic. They've been taking the ball away. 5 takeaways in the last 2 games. Not coincidentally, their first 2-game win streak of the season. They've had 2 3-game losing streaks and some really heartbreaking losses mixed in there. So it's about time those tides have turned a little bit. And Kyle, we've talked a lot about the weaknesses. We've talked a lot about what they can do better. We've talked a lot about the identity as a run team. State of the union right now. Where do you see this team at 4-7? I know a few weeks back they had 1 win, right? You've won 3 out of 4, 2 in a row. There's a lot of excitement now. People thinking they're going on a big run. The Saints coming up, the Jets on the road after that. You got the Steelers with no Aaron Rodgers. And then you have the Bengals, who probably will have Joe Burrow back by then, I'm going to say. So some winnable games against some teams with some bad records and a possibility to get close to or maybe even to 500 with this win streak.
Yeah, I think the most interesting thing to me is the timing of the bye now, where, Mike McDaniel was asked on Monday about, how if there was a good or bad time to have a bye week when your team's finally starting to play well. And he was pretty confident at the podium that the momentum that they've built has been more so about them properly harnessing their intensity and preparation throughout the week to get ready to play the games on Sundays. And because it's been about their preparation and the positive reinforcement, he's confident that will not have a negative impact on taking a week off. And I think that becomes the latest litmus test and measure as we're assessing the football team. And Mike McDaniel is, if that's how you feel, man, is it a nice shot in the arm if this team comes out and proves you right and they come out big time focused and they put a really strong performance against New Orleans together. But if it goes the other way, I think that can be something that continues to be looked at as we figure out exactly where this team is at. That, it's a young team. They've had trouble kind of getting the team up and ready to play some games. We felt like we had something, and then we take some time away, and we kind of misjudge where the team is at. So I think this game against the Saints, from a win-loss perspective and big picture for playoffs or postseason or winning records, all that kind of stuff, like, I'm just taking the next evaluation opportunity for what Mike McDaniel believes about his football team versus what his team affirms or denies he is right about with this football team, because that's the big picture conversations we should be having, right? Like, we're really interested in how 2025 is going to play out at the end of the year. But at the same time, we're trying to figure out who are the right people to be in place to lead us into the future. And this is a good measuring stick for that, I think.
And see, the short week didn't work against the Ravens, right? Coming off that Falcons win, the short week didn't do them any justice. They had 10 days off after that game and now 14 days off. So, you know what I mean? You think about it, just that one game in that time span is a lot. And you end up with the 10-day break did you well, and now you have the 14-day break. So a ton of time off between that Thursday night game, the 10-day break there, and now the bye week. That's a lot of time for guys to be off at this stage of the season.
Yeah, but it's also good. I mean, you got some, especially older players, they're nicked up a little bit. They're banged up. They get a chance to, get their bodies back, for this final stretch, So it's good and bad. But to me, I think it's a good time to have a bye. I always liked them later. I hated them when they were early because, like, you just got out of training camp and now you're having a bye, like week 4 or 5. It's like ridiculous. Later, in the season, always worked out better for the teams I was on. Get players back, you get, juiced up for that stretch that you need, especially if you're making a playoff, run. And, these Dolphins, they're trying to get, back to 500. So I think it's a great time to get away, get your mind right, your body right, for this final stretch.
Kyle, how are the injuries looking right now? What are we hearing on any of these guys coming back? Like, is there any word on Waller as of right now? And on the defensive side of the ball, I know there's a couple guys that we're looking at. And look, Storm Duck's on injured reserve, and I'm wondering about Rasul Douglas in particular. And Juju's out, so I just wondered about, he's having surgery, so I think he's out for the year. So what is the injury status? What now?
Yeah, so we can say la vie to Juju Brents. We hardly knew ye, but we got 2 starts and season-ending surgery. There's what's been reported, which is a big-time bummer. because it's exactly the kind of player that you really want to get an idea on what you have. But that's kind of been the book on Juju through his first 2 seasons in Indy. So I would Mike McDaniel said in his presser on Monday that they're expecting a pretty good collection of talent back after the bye. That was said in tandem with some questions about IR. So I think some people took that talking about like a heavy dose of IR return guys. But if you read like the full quote, he's talking about guys that were close, like Rasul Douglas. Austin Jackson practiced last week. So I'd expect you'll see Rasul Douglas back against the Saints. I'd expect Austin Jackson will be activated and end up starting at right tackle in this game. And the question is, do they just roll with Cole Strange at right guard because that's where he's been? Do they give Larry Bourne with the extra prep a chance to kind of cross-train there after he's played there in his NFL career before? I think that's interesting, but I don't think we'll see James Daniels right off the jump. I'd be surprised with how they've handled Darren Waller in the first IR stint that he had or the time away that he had the first time, if he would end up getting activated the week of the Saints game and then play right away. So I don't expect to see Waller, but I'm not mad about that for the alternative being seeing more of Greg Dulcich as kind of the Juju Brents equivalent on the offensive side of the ball. Like I really want to figure out what we have here because he's made some nice plays and I think he's had a 14-yard reception in each of the last 3 games or longer. So that's kind of where we stand. I think we'll get some reinforcements at right tackle and at corner. And then maybe you see some other activation windows open, but they've been pretty deliberate. They usually do not bring a guy back from IR, open his window, and then have him play the same week. They usually take that as a buffer week. So it'll be a big week next week on Wednesday to figure out who's back at practice that's also on injured reserve.
All right, nice injury update from Kyle Krabs. Of course, you can catch him every day. Locked On Dolphins podcast right here on all these same channels on the #1 sports podcast network, the Locked On Podcast Network. And Z, on the flip side, you look at what's going on with New Orleans and the 2 young QBs, and you look at what's going on with the Jets with Fields getting benched now, and Rodgers probably going to be out for that Pittsburgh game on the 15th on Monday Night Football. Not sure about Joe Burrow yet with Cincinnati, but for a defense that's been playing well in the 3 wins of their last 4 games, they've given up 12 points a game, a 10 spot and 2 13 spots in those 3 wins. And you're coming up and you can feast on these younger QBs, on these inexperienced QBs, and these teams that are having so much trouble at this position. And dare I say it, Saints fans, Jets fans, maybe even Steeler fans at this point would kill for the quarterback that Dolphin fans want to get rid of in Tua. And so as a defense that's playing so well with all these takeaways and not giving up a ton of points, you're looking at the schedule and going, all right, not only can we keep this going, we can keep building and getting better and better with the momentum. And with Kyle talking about the guys who might be coming back, that only adds to it.
Well, yeah, but what I think, though, what's going on in the building right now, especially with Weaves on the defense, if we're talking about the defense right now, he's not looking at the schedule. He's just worried about playing good football like they have been playing. He's not worried about who they're playing. He's making sure everybody knows the scheme and is on point to get the turnovers and stop the run and get after the passer. Again, he's not going to sit there and start circling, oh, we should win this one because they have 2 young quarterbacks and their defense is struggling. He can't worry about that because we're struggling. We got the same problems in the building. We got to just take care of ourselves and do our thing and try to, win this game and then go on to the next one. We're not looking ahead. We're looking at the task at hand.
How likely do you think it is, Kyle, speaking of the task at hand, that this team runs the table in the next 3 and ends up at 500 after that Steelers game, especially with Rodgers out now?
I have some expectation that they'll win the next 2. Pittsburgh is kind of the next narrative buster opportunity. I know Rodgers is pushing to play this week. I'd be surprised if they let him play this week, but it sounds like there's no surgery on the table for his wrist injury. So I think there's a little bit more clarity before I get any level of confidence for Pittsburgh. But that's your style of play that you've adopted. If you want to prove that it's got staying power and you want to prove that it's legitimate, go play that Pittsburgh front and have the kind of success that you've had for some of the other teams that you've played, right? And we saw as against Cleveland, who has a good front and a dominant player, Myles Garrett. If you're game script dependent, are you going to be patient and stay running the ball? Are you going to get away from it? Or are you going to abandon it and get back into the passing game? And that's where you can still facilitate turnovers, where Pittsburgh's got a lot of veteran guys on the backfield. But I look at where the Jets are at organizationally. and I look at Miami having extra rest against an inexperienced quarterback and an extra week of preparation to play Tyler Shuck, I pick him to win the next two. And I think that gives you a chance to go into a primetime game and get back to some relevance at 7-7. And I'm hopeful that they give us that opportunity to see what they do with it.
Back-to-back primetime games, man. You go Pittsburgh on Monday night, Cincy on Sunday night, and that New England game at the end of the season is TBD, so it could still get flexed. You could still have that. So that'd be interesting, right? You work your way all the way back to 6-7 with a 4-game win streak, and then Monday Night Football and Sunday Night Football back-to-back in the spotlight for this team, which is interesting when you think of the way where they were a couple of weeks ago, Z. All right, that's Jeff Zgonina, Kyle Krabs. It's your Dolphins Squad show on the Locked On Podcast Network, the #1 sports podcast network in the world. And, of course, your team every day. Quick break for the YouTubers and regular break for those of you who are listening wherever you get your audio version. But we will wrap it up on the other side. More on the Saints. And then, of course, Champ Kelly had something to say to the players this week, and we talked about that a little bit pre-show. We'll hit that real quick as well. It's the Squad show, and we are right back in just a second here on YouTube with you. Very quick for the YouTubers right here as we wrap it up on the Squad show. That's Kyle Krabs, host of Locked On Dolphins. That's Jeff Zgonina. Call him Z. Kyle, I didn't realize Rodgers was pushing to come back so soon. That would be disastrous if he re-aggravates that injury any worse, and I don't know why he would try to push to play this week. But I give him credit for being a gamer, so it looks like he will be ready for the Dolphins game. But you talked about these next two games with the Saints and the Jets and all this time to rest and all the injuries healing and things of that nature, but also a lot more practice time, right? And a lot more opportunity to watch film, a lot more opportunity to continue along this new path offensively and defensively with the run game on offense. And then you have all the time to scheme for the young QB, like you said, with the Saints on defense, coming off all these takeaways. Now, you look at the NFL, right, Kyle? And you look at what leads to a 2-game win streak and a 3 out of 4. Of course, Penix didn't play, and the Falcons had injuries on defense, and then the Commanders didn't have Daniels, and they had a ton of injuries on defense. But the one game that stands out to me more than any in that streak, and you could say all you want about the Falcons and the Commanders, and you'd be right. You can put asterisks next to those wins all you want, although a win's a win. But the way that they played against Buffalo, that's what I'd be trying to encapsulate. That's what I'd be trying to drill into everybody in that building. You are that team that dominated that team. And to me, that's a big, big confidence booster, right? Because of the way the Bills have played this year, because of the way the Bills had owned the Dolphins, even though they played them well, they would always come up on the short end. But when you're looking at the way they put everything together in that game, Tua had the 2 deep balls picked, but other than that, he was real good intermediately. He was real good at leading the offense and ball fakes and all the stuff he does really well. The running game was there, especially late. You stuck with it, got the 2 big TD runs from Achan. The defense taking the ball away all over the field. So I'd be pointing at that game more than the other two and saying, hey, we are this team. This is our identity. Let's come out of this bye and really put it on New Orleans. Like, let's really come out flying. Let's really come out focused, and let's show ourselves. I don't believe you want to show anybody else anything. Show ourselves who we are and what we are in that game. And I think that's a huge game for Miami to make a statement to themselves.
Yeah, I think that's, it's one of the most complimentary football games across the board that this team's played in the last couple of years, really. I mean, it was all 3 phases. It was special teams, it was defense, it was the running game, and then you hit explosive passing plays off of that. And it's that positive reinforcement to a young team. If you prep the right way, this is what it can look like, and this is what you're capable of being. So it's to me all about how do you capture that week over week. And that's where the best teams in the league, they get better every single week, right? They're progressively better throughout the course of the season. We've seen Dolphins teams start red hot and fade down the stretch. And the challenge for this team is to make sure that this is not like a aberration for a team that's been struggling and gets a little bit of a shot in the arm because there were some organizational changes, but rather you can apply this and continue to stack and get better, and your young guys can play better and you can prep better, and you can come out and you can put together more consistent games across the board. And that's what I'm hopeful to see from them on Sunday when they play the Saints in week 13.
Yeah, and Z, so many guys playing for their jobs, right? And Champ Kelly came out, and I'm paraphrasing, and he said, hey, I'm my job's up in the air. All your jobs are up in the air. Talk to the team and connected with the players. And that's so true, because whether they're going to be here next year or even some of them even going to be in the league next year, this is a golden opportunity for a lot of guys on this team to audition for their spot on the team, their spot in the league for that matter.
Oh, yeah, without doubt. But again, every day you're doing that. It ain't just because the GM got fired or say the head coach got fired. Every day you walk in the building, you are auditioning to stay on that team or for one of the other 31 teams out there. So you always got to be on your game. You can't just take days off and weeks off mentally and physically when you go out there and give bad tape. So you're always, as a player now, you're always auditioning. And as a coach, you always are too. I mean, you just never know. I mean, you could be on a winning team and they want to go a different direction and they send you packing. So you're always, honing your skills and staying sharp and, and doing your best you can every day.
Kyle, who are some of the guys or a couple of the guys that you've been looking at these past few weeks, the 3 out of 4 streak, the 2-game win streak, who you maybe thought differently of coming into this stretch of the season and thinking, I don't know what we have. I don't know if this player is going to be here or going to be a solution anywhere. Who are a couple of those guys who have really stepped up in these past few games and kind of opened your eyes a little bit?
Yeah, I'd say a couple of guys that are on 1-year contracts that you're at least entertaining the idea of, hey, do you run it back and sign this guy in free agency, depending on what the ultimate football operation decision is from a scheme perspective? Or we hold on to the entire coaching staff and running the same schemes again and going shopping, knowing exactly what we need. But I think Jack Jones, with a performance like the one that he just had, he's always been up and down, right? There's been highs and lows, and we saw the lows earlier this season, but this was a big kind of scheme and style departure for him as a guy who was traditionally off, not asked to play physical in the contact window. And he's had to get coached up on that. You go back to training camp and they went to Detroit and they left him on an island against Amon-Ra St. Brown and said, hey, we want you to disrupt him in the contact window and get really physical with him and work on your technique. Didn't go well. It was the Detroit media said it was the worst joint practice in the history of mankind, and the Dolphins are never going to win a game. And Amon-Ra St. Brown had 30 touchdowns at practice today, and Jack Jones is the worst football player in the history of mankind. Well, it turns out that's not true, but they put him out there and said, we want to test where you're at here, and then we also want to test how you can apply your technique. So that big jump, I think you've seen some things from him the last couple of weeks that at least have me entertaining the idea that, hey, maybe this isn't a 1-year stopgap, because this team is going to need, if you let all the 1-year contracts go, you're going to need another large infusion of players, and you'll probably be in the same position in the first half of the year next year as far as guys going through growing pains and rookies having to play. Are they ready to play? Do they need to play? So I'd shout out Jack Jones off that game against Washington. And you listen to how the team in the locker room, if you caught the stuff in the locker room after the game, McDaniel's giving out game balls and all that, he's got some guys in that locker room that are pulling for him. And, stuff like that is not lost on me with a guy like Jack, who kind of wore out his welcome in New England pretty early. And then the Raiders chose to move on from him after the end of his rookie contract. And it took him until August to sign somewhere.
How about you, Z? What are you seeing out there?
I see the guys are coming together as a team finally and playing together and playing with a lot of juice late in the season through a bad first half of the season. They're playing for each other. They're playing for their coaches, both offensive and defensively. You watch some of the sideline stuff, with Weaver getting in with the guys, and everyone seems like they're celebrating, which you love to see when you have a down season, and you're having some troubles and you're starting to put it together and starting to believe in one another. You have a chance to, win a lot of games and have a great future, both, this year and next year for this team. So I think it's been, that's been what I've noticed and I've really like to see.
I want to kind of finish the show out the way we were talking before we came on live with you two, just kind of breaking down the GM scenario, Kyle coming off the GM show. But, Champ Kelly, obviously, I think we all agree is not going to be the guy in the future for this team. But a lot of these players will be back. Some real good draft picks coming up where they can fortify and add to this team. So whoever gets that job is going to have some things to work with. But chief among them, Kyle, and I know I want to start it with you and just have you and Z go back and forth. on the GM scenario. But the number one thing to me for any organization, for any individual for that matter, we've all been faced with these times in our lives where you can go one way or the other, and there's no C. There's no option C. You can either tighten up that chin strap and keep marching forward and getting better, or you can submit, fall down, and let the world beat you up. And clearly this team is the former, not the latter, which is for any potential GM coming in, the number one thing I'm looking at is seeing the fortitude and the refusal to quit inside that building. And that speaks volumes about a lot of guys in that building.
Yeah. And I think that's from what you're talking about and applying it to a team building philosophy, I think is probably where this past iteration of the team lost its way a little bit, where we're going to build through the draft and we're going to have a sustainable winner. And then you go through 19 and you get all the draft picks and the 5 picks in the top 40. And then you spend all the money in free agency in 2020. And then in 2022, you trade off first round draft picks and 6 draft picks for Tyreek Hill, and then another 3 draft picks for Bradley Chubb at the trade deadline. And they all get big contracts. And then you bring in Jalen Ramsey and he gets a new deal. And then he gets a new deal again just a year later. And Tyreek Hill gets a new deal. And it very quickly flew in the face of, if you go back to 2019, when they talked about what they wanted the team to be and what the build was going to be, it didn't stay like that. And that's where that conviction and that stay the course and that methodical process, I think that's where, I think Miami can be in a decent spot when you look at some of the in-house talent that's the foundation in which the house is going to be built on moving forward with some of the young guys that are here. They shouldn't feel super compelled to spend record-breaking money in free agency like they did in 2020, where you get 1 year through that, and Eric Flowers, who signed a $10 million a year contract, was gone. Kyle Van Noy, who signed like a 4-year, $56 million contract, he was gone. Shaq Lawson signed a $10 million contract per year. He was gone. Byron Jones played 1 more year, had an Achilles injury, was never to be seen again, and he set like record-setting money at cornerback. That was all in one offseason. And like none of those worked out particularly well. And then you just reflect on the money that you paid the guys, and it's like, well, we took a bunch of guys that were known assets elsewhere and paid them top of dollar to come in here and be something that they didn't end up being. So I think that methodical process, not taking shortcuts in how you're going about it, and methodical approach is going to be really important.
Zia, I know you have a favorite for the GM role. One of the guys Kyle was talking about, and you guys had a great conversation about it before the show. So maybe give some of that insight to the audience about one of your guys.
Well, Ray Agnew, we played together in St. Louis, and I think he's done a heck of a job where he's been. He worked his way up the food chain out with the St. Louis and LA Rams, did everything in the building, from player programs to scouting to, internal scouting, Bledsoe, he did it all, and he worked his way up. And one thing, if the timeline works, I can't remember when he left to go to Detroit, but he's also a guy that has gone through kind of what Kyle was just talking about, selling it out for, draft picks and money, like they did, for the Rams to get to the Super Bowl. They gave a lot of draft picks away. They paid a lot of people, right, just to get, those guys in there. Then they went through those lean years and they built it back to go to another Super Bowl, and then they got lean again. And then now they built it back again, and Detroit, when they first showed up there, I think it was the same way, right? It's, salary cap issues, and he was the assistant GM there, and him and the GM built their way out of it, and now they're perennial winners every year. So that's another thing that you have to look at with a GM who's gone through these things, because it could be a mess here if whatever GM gets this job for a year or two to clean this mess up with all the dead money and no draft picks and everything. So he's been through the storm, so it's something to look at.
And Kyle, you look at New England, you look at Indianapolis, you look at some of the teams, the Tampa Bay with Baker Mayfield, the Rams at 8-2. This league, with the right coach and the right culture and a couple of good picks, and I know development of a guy like Drake May is huge in New England, but probably not as big as Vrabel with the culture, right? So the turnarounds can be quick. And when you're building the type of momentum this team's building this year, the confidence grows. So there can be hope that this thing doesn't have to be a tear down and a rebuild. It could be something that kind of can flip that switch and turn quickly.
Yeah, I would love for the collective fan base to embrace you don't have to get rid of every good player on your roster for draft picks, because that became normalized in 2019. And that's what you've seen the Jets now do. And it's a great, ambitious plan. And it gives you a lot more flexibility, and it gives you a lot more leeway on how you're going to go about putting together a roster, but it also gives you a lot more work to do. And it gives you a lot more in the way of, there's never a batting 1,000 hit rate in drafting players for the NFL draft and bringing players in, right? Like the best of the best probably look at it and say, hey, if we have a 70% hit rate in the first round and a 55 or 60% hit rate in the first 4 rounds, we're elite at what we do. And, I think that's for Miami, to Z's point, talking about draft capital, and they do have the 3 threes this year to use to their advantage, but they need to get back into that cycle where they have extra picks. And just talking about Ray Agnew and being with Brad Holmes, and they came over as a part of that from scratch build that they did with Detroit starting in 21. At 21 draft class, they had a 1, a 2, and 2 3s and 2 4s. And one of those extra 3s was Aleem McNeil, who's an outstanding defensive tackle. And one of the extra 4s was Amon-Ra St. Brown, who's one of the best 5 wide receivers in football. 2022, they have 2 1s because of a trade that they manufactured, and they end up with, I think it was the Stafford trade was that draft pick, and they get Aiden Hutchinson, Jamison Williams. They draft Kirby Joseph in the 3rd round, and he's one of the best pure ball hawking free safeties in football. But they had 2 1s. Then in 23, they have 2 1s, 2 2s, and 2 3s. So that's how you get the lifeblood rolling. And then once you have the foundation of the roster set, then it kind of becomes what Howie Roseman does in Philadelphia and what Baltimore does with Eric DeCosta, where that's where you can game the compensatory pick. And we got guys in the pipeline for a few years that are going to step in and be a starter for us. And then if it doesn't go well for a year, at least they're well-versed. We kind of know what we have, and then we can go get an upgrade. But we've got a surplus in draft picks, so we can send a 3rd-round pick for Jalen Phillips at the trade deadline because we're getting a comp 3rd back anyway for somebody else that we lost in free agency. It's like Miami tried to do all these things in small spurts, including gaming the comp pick system, but they didn't tie the whole process together. And that's where you look for inspiration from programs like Detroit and Philadelphia and Baltimore and see what they do. And you say, okay, like this is the roadmap. Who's the best candidate for us to implement this starting now, moving forward?
Yeah, and I didn't mean to leave out the Bears, Z. I didn't mean to leave out the Bears and the job that Ben's doing there. Ben Johnson, he's been great. The Bears have been terrific on defense, and they've been running the ball to their identity, so that's another good team. All right, time to wrap it up. I'll give my final shot first, and I just want to say that we're talking about the GM in the future and all these draft picks, but I don't want to lose sight of the present. This team is on a great run right now, 2 in a row, 3 out of 4. The defense, opportunistic, taking the ball away, holding teams to an average of 12 points a game in the 3 wins. They found their identity in the run game, but all that said, it means nothing, absolutely nothing, if they don't win these next 2 games. These 2 games are among the most important in recent Miami Dolphins history, with the Saints and the Jets coming up, and that's my final shot. Stay focused in that building. Keep that momentum going, win these next 2, and then, hey, let it hang from there going into Pittsburgh and Cincy back-to-back. Z, what's your final thought today?
Yeah, I'm the same way, because we kind of struggle against teams that are the same as us, struggling. So, I want us to come out of the gates, after getting our bodies back and everything next week against the Saints, and really, really put a hurt on them, not just get by 3 points. I know a win's a win, but I want to see a dominant football game against a team that should not be on the field with us.
Kyle?
Yeah, and I think part of that formula, potentially getting Austin Jackson back like we talked about, if he is indeed back, I really hope they give some consideration to Larry Bourne playing at right guard. I would love to see him get a chance to stay in the lineup. I think he's played at a much higher level than Cole Strange has at right guard. They often send the center that way because it's 2 backups on the right side, so he gets a little bit more extra baked-in support on his inside side, and that's leaving Jonas Avainaya, the rookie at left guard, who I think probably played his best game of the season against Washington. He ends up being on a little bit more of an island more frequently, and that's why he's so present in a lot of his pressures. So if you could raise the floor of 2 spots at once when you get Austin Jackson back, man, I think that'd be a great shot in the arm until we're ready to see James Daniels, whenever that is. And I hope that we get the chance to see that, because he's got no guaranteed money on the hook for 2026. So if they're going to make regime changes and coaching changes and they're going to strip down payroll, we got to know what we have in James Daniels, and we've seen him play for 3 snaps. So my eyes are on the offensive line, that right side of the offensive line, if Austin Jackson's coming back against the Saints.
All right, well, we got 11 days until the Saints game, but we have 2 shows before then. So Monday and Wednesday next week, we said, guys, right? So noon Eastern, Monday and Wednesday for your squad show. We'll all be watching that Saints game. And by the way, Falcons at Saints Sunday. It's the late game, not the Sunday night game, but a late game as in like 4:30 kickoff, 4:35, the Saints and the Falcons. So you get a much better idea of what you'll be facing the next week when New Orleans comes to town. And then after that, it's the JETS suck. And that one is on the road to get to within a game of 500, assuming that they can beat the Saints on the 30th. For Kyle Krabs, and by the way, keep on watching Kyle, Locked On Dolphins every single day right here on all these same channels where you're with us, whether it's YouTube, wherever you get your audio podcasts, or on Roku. And then, of course, Jeff Zgonina, former Dolphin player and coach for a long time, 27 years in the NFL, imparting that wisdom, especially once the lights came back on and Z was in living color. So thank you guys for another great show. Thank you for being here. Thank you for helping us be the #1 sports podcast network in the world and for making us your choice to bring you everything you need to know about your team every day. Keep your game tight and your mind right. Enjoy the break, and we will be back on Sunday with another edition.